Good morning everyone and welcome back to Tactics Board. The mood around Carrow Road is a very positive one after Norwich City's 6-1 win over Plymouth Argyle in midweek. But can they back it up against Luton Town? That's the question we're asking this weekend. You know the drill here. I'm going to take you through my predicted 11, how the game could pan out strategically, some of the opposition strengths and weaknesses, and then I'm going to take a look at the midfield dilemma that's building up for Johannes Thorup, because from a position where there was a lot of weakness and a lot of selection issues, he's now got quite a few options in form, so it should be an interesting decision for him over the next couple of games. Right, we're going to get to that, but first of all, there's that starting 11. So without further ado, here's the team I think Thorup will trust against the Hatters. So I've gone for Angus Gunn in goal, Jack Stacey at right back, Shane Duffy and Callum Doyle in the centre of defence, with Kellen Fisher at left back, Kenny McLean, Emiliano Marcondes and Anis Ben Slimane in midfield, with Amankwa Forson on the right, Borja Sainz on the left and Ante Cianats through the middle up front. A few selection problems for Thorup there, but the sort of problems that any head coach loves to have, really. He's got a few players coming back, and I'll start with that left back, right back sort of shake up, because with Kellen Fisher returning from suspension, of course he missed one game because he had amassed 5 yellow cards, you could say that he'll slot straight in at right back, having been so impressive in that role for so many games before that suspension. Of course, started at left back against West Brom, and I think that's where he'll be again against Luton, because you just can't drop Jack Stacey given his current form. Of course, he's come back into the lineup since the international break, 2 games, 3 assists, and all of them were actually pretty impressive ones. I think we can all see what he gives the team. And although at the start of the season he didn't really look like a Thorup sort of player, with Fisher on that other side playing the more inverted role and him pushing up higher, you can see how it sort of suits that possession-based system and how it gives Norwich different threats. And I think especially against Luton, and of course we'll come on to their strengths and weaknesses, but they've struggled at times with pace and directness out wide and dealing with players who like to take people on, and Jack Stacey is very much more of that type than Kellen Fisher. He's probably the best available option of any of the fullbacks that Norwich have in terms of being direct, taking players on and getting crosses into the box, and those are the players that Luton have been struggling with at times this season. So I think he's in a good position to go on and do that again this weekend, which is why I feel like he has to stay in that right back role. And then at left back, I thought Ben Krezene was okay against Plymouth. You know, not sensational, not terrible at all. I have sung his praises a few times on here this season, but I think if it's a choice between him and getting Kellen Fisher back in the team, having a bit more balance with one inverted fullback and one who's a bit more direct and a bit higher up the pitch, then I think it will be Fisher who Thorup chooses. And given the form of some of those fullbacks, it's hard to see how he denies either of those right backs an opportunity to be in the starting 11 again. So I think it will be those two at fullback. Then in terms of the midfield, and we'll come on to that and the wider debate a little bit later, but for this game it feels a bit more cut and dried, because Marcelino Nunez, Thorup said at his pre-match press conference, isn't in a position where he can really start a game. He'll be on the bench, of course, and he has returned to fitness, but they don't want to risk him, and they are going to take things slowly and cautiously. So we don't expect to see him in the starting 11, and then it's a choice between 4 players: Marcondes, McLean, Slimane and Jakob Sorensen. And it feels like to me, out of those 4 players, there's one who's probably fairly easy for Thorup to drop out of those. And I think tactically, actually, it made sense to have Sorensen and McLean in that team against Plymouth, because it allowed Marcondes to be in that number 10 role. And of course, there's an argument that they could continue with that, but it was Sorensen's error that sort of gifted Plymouth that goal, or at least gave them the opportunity to go on and score to make it 2-1 and make things a little bit nervy towards the end of the first half. And also, obviously, Slimane came on, produced a pretty good performance and then topped it off with his first goal for the club. So it feels like those 3 have a real momentum about them. They've now got McLean back, who's a bit more of a defensive option, will cover more ground than Sorensen and be a bit more involved than Sorensen. And it feels like that 3 at the moment is probably where the most solidity and the best guarantee of a good performance comes. So I think that's what Thorup will choose. I wouldn't be surprised to see Sorensen in there again for tactical reasons, but it does feel fairly unlikely, and I think it will be those three. And then the front three, I think, speaks for itself. Forson was the one and has been the one who's come off twice in the last 2 games, and I think it's still an area that Thorup's looking at. In fact, he said the right wing area is one they've still yet to nail down in terms of the solution. But I think Forson has done well enough in those couple of games to start on the right. You've got Ante Cianats, who looked much, much better against Plymouth, and of course got that goal that everyone was delighted for him to get. And it feels like he might be able to kick on now. And although that's not a given, you would like to see him in that central role. That means a vacancy on the right wing, and I think Forson has done enough to be there. So a few selection problems for Thorup, but as I said, he'll like to have those problems and those decisions, and it will be interesting again when that team news drops at 2 o'clock tomorrow. Now on to Luton Town, and I don't think there's any secret as to how they try to play their football. It's direct, it's physical, it's aerial, there are a lot of long balls, and they'll play the ball into the strikers and then try to get their midfielders and wingers involved from second balls and knockdowns. They've got a couple of strikers up there, Carlton Morris, who of course is a Norwich Academy graduate, and Adebayo, who both have done a pretty good job at times over the last couple of seasons, especially in the Premier League. They were the ones who almost drove Luton to a bit more of a competitive relegation battle. Of course, they eventually succumbed, and they have struggled back in the Championship, and that's when that sort of style of play gets exposed, is when you do it a little bit slower, with less quality and with less conviction. It doesn't look great at all, and it maybe never has looked especially pretty in all of their success, but it has looked effective, and they have done it with quality. But that's what they're struggling with this season. However, there are a lot of the same players. They've got a few decent players in that squad, so you'd say there could be a game where at some point it just clicks, and although they're in poor form at the moment and it feels unlikely, Norwich won't want to be the team that happens against. So it's especially important that they're physical, that they're good in their aerial duels. They've got a centre-back duo of Callum Doyle and Shane Duffy who are good at that, but maybe haven't faced such a high-quality direct threat previously. They've faced a few teams who want to play that way, but realistically those strikers have been quite inferior to that centre-back duo. But against Luton, it feels like it should be a fairly good match. The good news for Norwich is that tactically, they maybe don't have that defender who likes running in behind, with Jose Cordoba only fit to be on the bench. So it feels like this week does come at quite a good time for Norwich injury-wise and in terms of that tactical matchup. But they will have to be on their game to stop Luton clicking back into the sort of form that we've seen from them over the 2 years prior to this season. So that's something that Norwich have to be wary of. But there are ways that they can attack them, as I mentioned previously with reference to Jack Stacey. Luton have struggled against sort of pacey individual players who like to take players on and who like to create opportunities themselves. Of course, they've got somebody in Borja Sainz on the left wing who has done that very, very well this season, and actually is somebody who in all games Norwich try to isolate against the fullback, and that could bode especially well this weekend against Luton. So that's something they'll try to do. Set pieces as well is somewhere where Norwich might have joy. Of course, they've mainly struggled this season, but scored their first against Plymouth when Shane Duffy headed Emiliano Marcondes' corner in. And actually, you'd think against a team like Luton that they would be quite strong, but the numbers show that they maybe haven't been amazing from set pieces over recent games, and Norwich will hope that they can take advantage of that. So a few weaknesses for Norwich to exploit, but some strengths that maybe Luton haven't shown much over the last few months, but could click into place, and they'll have to be wary of as well. I wanted to finish with a bit of a discussion about that midfield position, and with Marcelino Nunez now fit to return to the matchday squad, it feels like Thorup has actually gone from a situation where he had a bit of an injury crisis in that area to now several players who are in form and are looking good, and actually a couple will probably have to sit on the bench in the next few weeks. There are various midfields that he could put together with various tactical implications, so I just wanted to break down a few of the main ones and what that might look like for Norwich. Of course, we saw against Plymouth Sorensen, McLean and Marcondes, and that almost manifested as a bit of a 4-2-3-1 with Sorensen and McLean slightly deeper, Marcondes in a bit of an advanced number 10 position. And Thorup has actually talked about the fact that he feels like Marcondes is better when he's closer to the striker, when he's closer to Borja Sainz, and I think we've all seen the fruits of that connection over the last couple of games. And you could see why in the balance of the team, especially against a team like Plymouth who were struggling and where Norwich were likely to dominate possession and dominate the game, that they could afford to have that midfielder in a more advanced position and more committed to that attacking side of the game. But I think over time, Thorup will probably track towards the 3 with 1 sitter and 2 sort of number 8s that we've seen under him over the last couple of months. So in that sense, it feels like maybe there isn't room for Sorensen tactically, because it's either him or McLean in that deeper role. And you just feel like McLean contributes a bit more. He covers more ground. He's more of a physical presence, and on the ball, he's probably more of a threat as well. He's more likely to turn into midfield and cause problems for the opposition, rather than Sorensen, who, yes, is a tidy technical player, but doesn't really do much by the way of progressing the ball, just keeps things ticking and sort of keeps possession. Although, as we saw with that Plymouth goal, sometimes even that can go wrong. So I'd expect that it will be McLean in that deeper role and those 2 number 8s either side of him. That's what I'm going for tomorrow's game. And then it comes down to a choice between really Anis Ben Slimane, Marcelino Nunez and Emiliano Marcondes for those 3 positions. Now, a couple of months ago, you'd have said with all of those players fit, it's a very easy choice. Anis Ben Slimane and Marcelino Nunez had both had very good starts to the season. You know, it's an easy decision for Thorup to put them in there. And then Marcondes, the free agent who they signed as a bit of a backup as a response to that injury crisis, would be on the bench. But he's been excellent for Norwich over the last few games. As I mentioned, that combination with Borja Sainz, the assists, 2 assists, of course, in that Plymouth win, and then the goal against West Brom. And he's shown that he really can contribute from midfield positions. And when they've got Josh Sargent out, and maybe Sargent isn't contributing the same goal-scoring numbers that he did last season, they do need goals from other areas. And of course, they've got Borja Sainz, who is already hitting unbelievable numbers, got another hat-trick in that Argyle win. But of course, they would like to see goals from midfielders and defenders. Shane Duffy has got a couple already this season. And when you've got Marcondes getting on the score sheet for the first time for the club, Slimane then follows that up 3 days later, it feels like contributions like that are going to be really key for Norwich. And maybe having Marcondes in there and he can do things like that, maybe that is a major bonus for Norwich. And it feels like right now, really, he has to be in that team, because although they have a lot of tidy players who can keep things ticking and can contribute to the system, they maybe don't have too many mavericks who can go and create chances by themselves, can pick out intricate passes. And actually, I feel like although Marcondes maybe isn't likely to do that all the time, he can do that a couple of times in a game. And when you've got someone like Sainz with the shooting form that he's in, that always gives you a decent chance of a goal in a game. So for me, Marcondes has to be in there at the moment. And then it comes down to Anis Ben Slimane or Marcelino Nunez. And tactically, they do offer quite different things. Nunez will cover more ground. Slimane will maybe be a more physical presence in challenges. And I think Slimane is more of that sort of number 10 mould. And although you look at them both and you'd say Nunez is more suited to that, Slimane is somebody who wants to try more tricks, wants to show a bit more flair, maybe wants to be in and around the box. And he showed that with that finish against Plymouth as well. Whereas Nunez is somebody who keeps it ticking, but maybe in a slightly different way to Sorensen. He does it a bit more proactively. He wants to find those forward passes. He wants to up the tempo rather than slowing it down. And I feel like for Thorup's system, if you've got Marcondes in there, maybe you can afford to have Nunez, who maybe is a little bit deeper, but also, you know, provides that momentum and a little bit of a higher tempo. So for me, going forward, the 3 would be Marcondes, McLean and Nunez, but he's definitely got several options in there. Of course, Liam Gibbs is another one who, when he comes back from his latest injury, you'd hope will be able to retain his fitness for a while, and looks like somebody who Thorup trusts in various roles. They've got Forson, who I spoke about in that right wing position earlier, but can also come into midfield, and it feels like with a bit more confidence, he maybe will be able to return there before long. So he has got a few options, and now that midfield looks like a really strong area of the team. And with other areas struggling from selection crises, you'd say that's really good timing for Norwich. But a lot of things going well at Carrow Road. I'm sure we're all very hopeful they can continue that against Luton Town. We'll have every kick of the game covered across our channel. So go to pinkun.com/subscribe if you haven't already. We've currently got a fantastic deal on, so go and check that out as we enter the festive period. Thank you very much for joining me on Tactics Board. Of course, I'll be with you again before QPR next week. So let's hope in that one we're talking about another win over the Hatters. See you then.